A special thank you to Christy Byrne Yates for joining us today and sharing her expertise on the sandwich generation, which means caregiving for someone typically who is aging or older, such as a parent, while at the same time caring for a child who's younger and being stuck between the two. But Christy shares how there's all different types of sandwiches and how kinship care often you are sandwiched between multiple roles as well. So I hope you enjoy this presentation. Thank you so much again, Christy, for this helpful information.
Born in Cincinnati and grew up in the Dayton area. But now I live out in California, and I have been a school psychologist. I retired in 2021 after about 20 years, and then I've done a number of other different things. As a school psych, I definitely worked with a lot of folks like yourselves who are, ready to take on that challenge of having to care for, not having to, choosing to. And I really want to honor that, like choosing to care for someone when that wasn't necessarily your initial plan, right? And so that's very much in common with what I discovered as being part of the sandwich generation. So what happened, my story, I guess, is that I was raising my kids here in Sacramento, and my parents lived up the road. It was great. They were wonderful. They loved my kids. They loved my husband. We all got along. We did stuff together. It was terrific. They were free babysitters. It was fantastic, right? So all the good stuff. And then they started to really decline. And for about 6 years, my husband and I did a lot of management of their care. They had already laid out their end of life wishes and had, really taken care. They were Depression era folk. They took care of their money, and so we didn't have to worry about that. Thank goodness. I mean, they weren't rich, but, they had just done some things, I think, that made my husband and I say, oh, we better follow this path because we don't have all these things in place. And we got 2 kids. We got to take care of this. Eventually, both were diagnosed with some form of dementia. My mother had Alzheimer's, my father had vascular dementia, and they both died in the summer of 2015. My dad died in July, and then 7 weeks later, my mother passed away. And that was also the year that my oldest son had graduated from high school in 2015 in May, and then left and moved across the country to back to Ohio. He went to Xavier University in Cincinnati. And so I had a lot of loss, right? I had all those things that are really wonderful, like your kids graduating from high school and then going away to college, how exciting. But then I lost both my parents, and it was really, really hard. And I didn't realize till later when I went back. I took a little bit of time off with my mom, and when I went back to work, people just were coming at me saying, how did you handle this? How did you handle that? What about this? And I realized people aren't talking about this. And I didn't even know the term sandwich generation. But I started, kind of processing things, and for a number of years really kind of chewed on a lot of different things, and discovered this term. And that was somebody in New York City in the 1980s, I think, coined this term. And she was a social worker, and she was dealing with people, mostly women, who were, frantic, like, oh, all of a sudden now I'm raising my kids, and now I'm taking care of my parents too. And so feeling squeezed was the whole piece. And so that's where that term sandwich generation came from. And when I talk to groups, I always want to acknowledge there are all different kinds of sandwiches, right? There are a million, just like at a deli, there are a million sandwiches. And I was, in talking to Angela about kinship caregivers, I think you guys are like a triple decker, I don't know, with, a side order of like crazy fries or something, because it's a lot, right? Am I correct? Is anybody resonating with that? Does that sound accurate? Yeah. Okay. So, so some of you may also be now, and I don't know how many. I don't have my chat open, but if this is something where, let me open that chat. If this is something where you also are caring for an older person, it could be a spouse, it could be it could be a grandparent, it could be your own parent. then you might be in the sandwich generation on top of being a kinship caregiver. But I think some of the things are very similar. So, yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to share my screen. Anything, Angela, you want to jump in?
No, I just wanted to open up if anyone wants to share if this resonates with
Yeah,
them. And I was even sharing with Christy, like sometimes with the children's birth parents who struggle with their own mental health a lot of times and addiction and all of that. Like that's another caregiving role. Sometimes you're
exactly.
sandwiched between. So it can just be a lot of different people's needs you're trying to meet yourself in. And that's why self-care for you is so important. But I think a lot of this will resonate. So if anyone has an experience to share, feel free to share in the chat.
Well, and that's why I say there are all kinds of sandwiches. I typically talk about having an aging person that you're caring for and then children, but there are a lot of people that a lot of people care for. So it's that feeling of being squeezed and so who are you in the middle and how are you taking care of yourself? And I see someone, yeah, so special needs daughters. Okay, so see, as a school psychologist, most of my work was with special needs kids, and I just know that a lot of parents had a lot on their plate all the time. So there's a lot going on. I kind of pulled from a bunch of different things that I've done before, so I won't go through all of them.
No, we're excited to hear it.
So this was my sandwich. Okay, so my parents are on the left-hand side. In the tan jacket is my dad, and then my mom. Those are my two kids, and those are my in-laws on the other side. And now we're really doing a lot with my in-laws. They are in their early 88 and 91. So, in fact, my husband's down there with them right now. My children are mortified that I share this picture because this was when they were like, in middle school. And my son here is actually, he just turned 28 and my daughter is 25. So this is an oldie but goodie, but they're like, Mom, I can't believe you show people that picture. But this was
Ohio
my,
State on, right?
what's that?
Does he have Ohio State
He
on his
does have
photo?
Ohio
There
State
we
on,
go.
yeah. And she's wearing Disneyland, so we're all over the place. Anyway, um, it's a tough time being squeezed, but there we go. I do want to share this with you. If you haven't heard this, this applies so much to so many things you're doing, and that is there are only, this is from Rosalind Carter, who really was in the corner for everyone who's a caregiver. But she says there are only, or she said, she passed away a couple years ago, there are only four kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. And really, the upshot of that is we all are facing something in caregiving. So I think that's important to keep in mind. So we have to pay attention to this in our country and in the world. Like, how are we treating caregivers? What are we doing as caregivers to take care of ourselves? So sandwich generation, I kind of told you what that was. So there are some unique stressors, and these may be some stressors that you already feel as kinship caregivers, right? Mixed emotions. You might feel a lot of joy and happiness and excitement, and then there might be times where you just feel like, really, now again, I've got to do this again, or oh my gosh, this is not what I bargained for, or I'm tired. When's it my turn to go have fun, or what have you? It's juggling generations. It's physical load versus mental load or emotional load. And those are two very different things. It may be a lot of physical work you have to do at times, and that might just be, having to do carpool again, or I don't know, all the things, right? But then there's the emotional load that maybe you have to take on. And I heard someone say, well, I loved the young person who was on there in the beginning and loved Zoom calls, and that was perfect. And I think might have been you, Pamela, said, well, COVID baby, they know Zoom. And it's like, this is a whole new world, right? Like, this is not how it was when we first were raising kids. So, and that means we have to learn and adapt to the changes and stuff like that. And then it's interesting, but we are growing. Everybody around us is growing, but we're growing too. And growth doesn't always feel good. So, yeah, that's kind of thing. This is just a quick thing about what might be happening. And I'm a teacher, I was a teacher and an educator, so I have to have a Venn diagram for everything I do. And here's mine. But, you know, we have caregivers, that's us in the middle. We have our children over here, and then we have our elders. And we could substitute this for some of the other folks you're taking care of. But what we all have in common is we're all responding to changes in our lives. And that's where things come up and get kind of funky. You know, I think as caregivers, we're always learning new caregiving skills. And like I said, that growth piece can really wear us out. And for our kids, they are growing in independence, right? And they're gaining new skills. And for the most part, they have some predictable milestones. We kind of know what's going to happen, you know, like we know when puberty hits and we know when things are happening, and we can kind of understand a little bit about that. But if you have elders that you're caring for, they're going through a whole different phase, right? They might be losing some independence. They might be losing some skills. So our interactions with them are more about safety and comfort. How do we help them? And one of the things that's really hard is that, you know, aging, there's some predictable milestones, but oftentimes they're interrupted by medical emergencies or disease process. It could be cancer. It could be more degenerative kinds of things, ALS or Parkinson's or other dementias. And so that changes everything. And you know, the other thing that changes everything are falls. Falls are the biggest thing that can impact aging. So, you know, that means we as caregivers have to learn. We're kind of, I feel like you're in a twilight zone. I always give the image of, you know, there were times when I felt like I was definitely in the twilight zone because I was, on the one hand, I was handing my car keys to my newly minted driver. And then the next day I was maybe having a conversation with my mom about, I don't think you should drive anymore, Mom, you know? And so it's like, where am I? How can I be having these two very similar but different conversations? So anyway, that's just another thing. And I just wanted to stop here and just say, how many, Addie's, you know, maybe if you want to jump in and tell me how you're feeling. How many of the stressors that I shared are ones that are already common for you? Let's see here. A unique stressor, I think, in the sandwich generation is something called anticipatory grief. And I never really knew what this was until much later, and I was writing my book. And it's really that feeling of extreme feelings of grief before your person has passed on. Because maybe you're seeing them decline. You're seeing them, you know, for me, it was because of dementia, and I was watching them decline in ways that I had never anticipated. That was not, you know, something I was thinking was going to happen. And physical decline. My dad had a stroke, and so there were just different things that happened, and that grief, even though they're still alive, was very real for me. And it's a very different kind of grief that can really knock you for a loop sometimes. For me, that kind of grief showed up as being irritable, lack of patience, frustrated, also sad. But it meant that there were times when I didn't show up joyfully for my kids because I was in the midst of my own grief. And there were a few moments that really made that clear to me that I needed to pay attention to taking care of myself because I was not showing up as the mom I wanted to be, right? And I am so grateful that my children were willing to say to me, hey, Mom, you know, as they got older, Mom, you need to be nice to Grandma. You know, that was hard for me to hear, and yet it was the best thing I could have heard. And I was so grateful that my kids cared so much about my parents. I'd raised them to be wonderful, caring, compassionate people, and here they were doing it, and they took the risk to say to their own mother, "Hey, you need to knock it off." And I realized at that moment, I am training them for someday taking care of me, right? Maybe. And so I don't want to train them to be irritable and short-tempered. I'd like them to be wonderful and compassionate, right? So I had to start checking myself and say, okay, what do I need to do when I'm feeling these feelings so intensely so that I can come back and be who I want to be? So that's a biggie for that. You know, this is just, I won't even go into this one, but I can talk about that later. But I do want to talk a little bit about systems, because sometimes if we have good systems in our lives, it does reduce some stress. So systems in a family might be things like schedules. Routines are really good. I don't know if any of you have figured out what works, common calendars. And a lot of these things, the thing about these are we need to practice them when things are going well and then continue them when they get tricky, right? If we start to use a strategy only when we're stressed out, it doesn't stick. We need to practice it all the time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about stress. I don't know if this applies to any of you. There is kind of a thing that happens, and that's what I call the trifecta. Kids in the sandwich generation are typically between 5 and 15, right? Maybe up to 18. But sandwich generation mothers, typically, this might not apply to any of you, but, can be anywhere from 35 to 45. And that's also strangely, ironically, weirdly, menopause, right? So it can be everything all at once. It's kids, parents, menopause, and talk about some stress. That's like the symptoms of stress show up like some of the symptoms of menopause, right? Sleeplessness, weight gain, fatigue, irritability. And so I mention that because I think one of the strategies is always getting yourself to the doctor, because I'll bet you get everybody else that needs to go to the doctor, they get their doctor's appointment, and yours might be like the one you cancel. And that would be something to think about. How do we do that? The other thing, and I don't know if you guys have ever talked about this, but there's burnout, and then there's compassion fatigue, and they're different and very much the same. So it really doesn't matter whether you tease it out, but I wanted to share that, burnout is kind of a cumulative process. It's over time, we keep getting it, and you keep getting these increased workloads or things, and it builds up in stages. And we start with being enthusiastic about something, and then it starts to feel stagnant, and then we get frustrated, and then we have apathy, and that can be a burnout. That's when we know we're in burnout. Whereas compassion fatigue, and I wonder if this is something you all experience at times, and that's this secondary trauma, right? Some of the kids you're caring for or other people in your life may have gone through a lot of trauma. And then while it may not be the trauma you experienced, because they're experiencing it, you are getting some of the effects, right? It starts to impact you too. It penetrates your well-being. And repeated exposure to other people's trauma. This happens a lot with anybody who works in a trauma center. Think of, mental health workers or hospital staff, ER staff, that kind of thing. It can really penetrate you and do a number on you. And it can coexist with burnout. It tends to have a more rapid onset, but you can recover from it if you can pay attention to it. So it's just being aware, like, what am I feeling, so that I can do something about it. So those are just that's more of that. And the stress cycle is really, this is an interesting one. You know what? Stress is something that it's over criticized sometimes, because we are blessed to have a stress cycle because it keeps us safe from a lot of things, right? It is from ancient times in our brainstem. And, we saw that saber-toothed tiger, and then suddenly our body is flooded with hormones that send blood and oxygen to our extremities so that we can run and escape. But now in modern times, we don't have saber-toothed tigers. What we have is we maybe have a boss who gives us too much work, or we have some other kinds of stress that comes at us, but we tend to see stress in everything. And then because we don't ever work through our stress cycle, then we have a buildup of cortisol in our system that can be very damaging to us health-wise. So working out your stress is important. And I'll give you an image here. If you've ever seen some of those nature videos, right? And you see the lioness is racing after an antelope, right? And just chasing after him. And the antelope is running for their life and escapes, miraculously escapes the lioness. And then the camera stays on the antelope, and you see the antelope just shake. They just shake. They shake like crazy for just like, maybe even 30 seconds. But that's them getting rid of all that cortisol, all those hormones that have been released in their body. That's getting it out of their system. And so we need to do the same thing. When we have figured out, okay, we're not stressed anymore. I'm safe again. We sometimes just kind of go back to our work. And what we might need to do is take some time to let go of some of our stress, the buildup of stress. And so some ways that we as humans can complete the stress cycle is to move. It could be, maybe you take a break and, do a little dance or 10 jumping jacks or take a walk or something. Really deep breathing is really great for that. So if you've ever learned any breathing techniques, those are great. Have some positive social interaction. Talk to somebody, tell somebody what's going on. Just let it go. Laughing, really big belly laughs. If you need to find your favorite video to make you laugh, find it, laugh. Hug someone, just a deep, wonderful, healthy hug is great. Crying is a way, and that's a great stress reliever. In fact, there's cortisol that is released through tears. So, if you cry, there's nothing wrong with you. It's great. It releases some things. Artwork, creating, it could be journaling, it could be drawing something. And then things called somatic work. So that could be things like mind body stuff. It could be yoga. There's a couple other techniques that I think are really great too. But that's just a way to let go of that stress. And then another strategy is I really love support groups. So I think it's just wonderful. You have found each other in this group. That's so important. The research on support groups is just phenomenal. And talking to other people who maybe don't have the exact same thing, but some of the same things, so important. As I said, annual checkups. And I like to talk about intention rather than expectations. So when we have expectations of other people, or actually I'll turn it around, expectations of ourselves that we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. Things interrupt expectations. It could be the weather. We were going to go have a picnic and then the weather changes and we can't. And so then we feel terrible. But if we have an intention of we're having a gathering and it's going to be food and we'd like it to be a picnic, but oh, it wasn't a picnic. We're going to bring it indoors and we're still going to have a family gathering and it's going to be wonderful. So we focus on intention. How do I want to be? How do I want to show up? Like I told you, I was upset that I was not showing up as a joyful mother with my kids, and I was letting my grief lead me to irritability when I could have done some things to address that. And I eventually learned that. I learned how to manage some things. And then just things that are resets, like some of the things I talked about in this reducing or releasing stress. That's resetting yourself. So breathing, guided imagery. Sometimes it's just take a break, take a step away. You're in the middle of a fight, okay, I'm going to take a step away. And I don't know if you've talked at all about emotional regulation, but with kids, one of the things that's most important is when they are elevated and escalated, the most important thing you can do is to regulate your own emotions. When they're escalated, if you meet them up here with your own raised voice, it's not gonna end well necessarily. It doesn't help the situation all the time. It's coming in calm, and you may need to just take your time to come in calm. So it's and then they'll meet you there. They'll meet you there eventually. It takes some time, but taking care of yourself is the best strategy there. So I'm going to stop for a minute. I can tell you a little bit more about impact on children, but I just wanted to ask about stress and what I've talked about with stress. Does any of this, are any of these strategies things that you use, or what are the ways that you have found help you release stress in your body and in your mind? So you can probably imagine the impact on children with any kind of trauma or any kind of stress for their caregiver is going to have an impact on them. One of the things that happens, and I just know this from having worked in schools for so long, but what happens at home comes to school. And you may already be seeing some of this at times, right? Because you probably have children who have had some very difficult times, and that might show up in schoolwork. It might show up as distraction or anxiety or behavior struggles. And there were so many times when I might be meeting with a parent and a teacher about a child who was struggling, and one of my first questions was always, has anything changed at home? And there were so many times when I heard, well, my grandmother just passed away and she was his first caregiver, or something like that. Or I now am taking care of my dad and I'm just so stressed out. And so this is happening. And so when things are happening in home, it does have an impact on our kids. And it can show up like academic struggles. And so this isn't to scare you, it's just to say, it is important to pay attention to it. It's you don't have to fix everything right now and go, but just being aware sometimes helps us to say, oh, I can think about this a little bit differently and find a new way to handle this. I don't need to go in there. So on this slide, I'm talking about some things you could do, and talking to you, Anita, you might want to check with your school and lean into school staff. It might not be the school psychologist, because they're usually the ones who are doing special education stuff, but many schools have access to counselors. Now, I got to tell you, things are changing, right? And so I don't know. I think school funding is getting dicey, so I don't know that those will be there. But most of the schools I worked at had access to some sort of school counseling, and that can be groups that help them at school. So if they're having anxiety at school in any way, they can do some school-based programs to help them. And then I guess I kind of want to wrap up. So one of the things about stress is you can also role model emotional regulation. So as adults, we have learned some. Sometimes we forget it. Listen, I forgot a lot of my emotional regulation when I was a sandwich generation parent. But what I do know, having been a parent, having been in that situation, and then also having worked in schools for so long, having discussions with kids about what's happening in their life and in your life is really important. So this doesn't mean you give them, details they don't want to hear that are too difficult, right? You need to be also sensitive to, do I have a child who can understand certain things, or are they, we're not going to say things to them that are going to trigger them. But when you're struggling, it's okay to let them know, you know what, I'm kind of stressed out right now. And so here's what I'm going to do about it. When you add that step of telling them what you're going to do about it, you're helping them learn, oh, it's normal to feel stressed out sometimes, or feel upset sometimes, or feel angry, or whatever we're feeling. But we can move through it, because we are not our feelings. Feelings come and go. So name feelings. And with younger kids, that's a really important thing, is to learn how to name feelings, so that when you say, how are you feeling? They have words, they have the vocabulary. But name your feelings. Let them know how you're feeling. And let them know what you might need. Right now, what I might need is a little bit more quiet, and that would help me. And then share your strategies. So when I get upset or I get sad, here's what I do. What do you do? So you invite that conversation and you invite that support. And that's how you can role model emotional regulation, because, we sort of wait for kids to just pick it up from everybody else, but people aren't self-regulating very well all the time. And it was very hard for the last 5 years to do that. So I think it's important to definitely have those conversations outright. It's kind of thinking outside your head and saying it out loud, so that they know that they're like you. You have tough days and you get through them. And how do you do that? I think those are pretty most of I do want to tell you that really there are gifts to all of these struggles, and there are things like flexibility, learning, resilience, adaptability. So it's not all horrible, right? Kids learn compassion in real time. So Yeah, so that's it. Oh, yeah, that's all I've got. So I'm going to come off of share, and there you go.
Thank you so much.
You have many strategies for stress relief, and that's great. So, pat yourself on the back.
Thank you. And I think a lot of times our body does kind of tell us what we need to do, what you were saying, even before this meeting. See, I'm like the worst student sometimes because I was feeling stressed about something that happened this morning that I was like, I really shouldn't still be stressed about this. Like, I thought about taking a walk, but then I'm like, no, I'll just like power through like getting things done before the meeting. And now I'm thinking I really should have taken that walk and listened to myself. But I think like we have those thoughts of like when we need that release too, and just like trusting it and listening to it and not putting it off or finding something that's like, more important to do at the time.
You are right. I mean, we have been socialized to believe we have to just kind of suck it up and keep going. It's that whole mentality that we have of, you can't take a break. You got things to do. Come on. And you know what? We're harming ourselves. So, yeah.
But I hope you all do take something with you, especially the strategies for getting out of that stress cycle and taking care of yourself as caregivers. And know that we are here for you. I did want to share a resource. Well, thank you all so much. This was such a great session. Christy, welcome to our KCC family. Let's give her a little round of applause. I think we all really
Sure.
enjoyed
Oh,
it.
thank you. My pleasure. It was delightful to be here, and I really am honored. I admire that you're all doing the work you're doing and stepping up for a need that is so great. So, really.
But thank you so much again. And thank you all for being here today. Remember to take care of yourself, and we'll see you back next week. For free resources, you can check out Christy's website, ChristyYates.com, and there's a lot of information, and she is also the author of a book, so please check her out online. Thank you.